Our last session, always the most difficult session, isn't it? Just end of the afternoon on a Friday afternoon. So we are going to try to make it sweet and the most dynamic as possible. So my name is Jean-Michel Grom, the Director for Action Against Hunger, or ACF UK in London. They have this strange idea to put a French in the island. So what we are going to speak for the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes is about the challenge that we are facing as an organization with this, as Klaus Sorensen mentioned this morning, this unprecedented level of needs is creating a lot of unmet needs. I think that the last figures from the UN were saying that the percentage of the needs which are not met have increased significantly. So in order to do so, and to scale up our operation and coverage of these needs, obviously it requires resources. By resources, there is two types of resources that are needed. The first one are human resources. And Marek this morning or this afternoon mentioned it. Many of the organizations I spoke with these last days, we face the same situation. We lack experts. We don't have enough people. In my organization, we are looking for more than 100 positions available today. And as I understood from many other organizations, that's one of the biggest challenges that we have in trying to find the experts willing and available to go there. The second challenge is about funding, getting the financial resources to respond to this level of unmet needs. And we are going to focus on that second part. And to discuss about that, I'm being joined by, I think, a more gender balanced panel than we had for the moment in the day. So it's my pleasure to have Esther Assin Martinez. She's the aide of Save the Children Brussels office or EU office. Lorena Dayala Valva, who is the emergency coordinator for SESVI. Nada Zawawi, who is the institutional fundraiser for GVC. And Marek Stis, who is the emergency coordinator or director of emergency for people in need, which is a Czech organization. So I'm going to start. So this morning we had a Klaus Sorensen, and the big challenge that we faced this last months has been, and we didn't speak too much about it throughout the day, was the situation of the unpredictability of the EU funding, the ECHO funding, which face a large crisis in terms of knowing if they will get enough of the money that's required, and therefore its implication for NGOs. So what I propose to kick off the discussion is to ask Esther to tell us a bit what have been the consequences, the concrete consequences of this unpredictability of funding from the EU, and why predictable funding is so important for us, especially in when we are faced with this kind of unprecedented needs. Esther.
Is it working? Okay. Merci, Jean-Michel. Hi, everyone. Very briefly, it was mentioned by I would like just to start. It's not working. Yes. Okay. I would like to start with a couple of very simple and striking figures regarding the EU humanitarian budget. It only represents 0.6% of the total EU budget, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny part. Yet, with only €2 per year per citizen, so us, EU humanitarian aid is reaching 120 million people every year. So I think it's a small budget, but could be highly efficient to reach the most in need. And I don't have the time to elaborate, but ECHO is facing a huge budget crisis, to put it very bluntly and naively. This is a structural issue that has to do with the way the EU budget has been operating forever. And of course, the first impact of that is also compromising the credibility of the EU as a humanitarian actor and the overall scale of the EU humanitarian operations. But of course, it's having an impact on the NGOs, which are the main partners of ECHO in implementing the humanitarian actions, and our beneficiaries as well. And just to give you, few examples, it has increased the overall administrative burden, which is already quite heavy for some organizations. So smaller overall operations, repeated contracting cycle, unpredictability of funding. So unpredictability makes very difficult simply to plan and to mobilize the resources to be able to implement aid operations. And this is felt by all NGOs, no matter what is the size of the organizations. The reduction and the delays in ECHO pre-financing payments leave NGOs covering these gaps by themselves, which is putting huge tension in the cash flow of particularly the medium and the small size NGOs, which limits, again, the ability to respond to further crises. And this is not sustainable, I would say, over the longer term. There's been as well a lack of prioritization, I don't know how to say that, of the longer term outlook. So, okay, we know humanitarian aid is about life-saving activities, but that's also at the detriment of some resilience-oriented or linking relief, rehabilitation and development activities, which is undermining the preparedness as well. It's making populations even more vulnerable to shocks and further increasing humanitarian needs in the future. Some organizations have reported scaling back responses in a number of fragile countries and contexts like Afghanistan, Yemen, or Iraqi refugees in Jordan. And it's been reported as well that food security interventions have been slow to arrive or much smaller in quite critical situations like the Sahel, Haiti, Somalia, or Ethiopia. So I would like to use the opportunity as well of this roundtable to call, and I think we have some representatives, maybe not the most relevant ones, but to make again a call to the Italian presidency to help us to solve this situation, both regarding the 2015 budgets, but especially the 2014 amending budget. We need the 250 extra money, but also considering the emergency aid reserve as a tool which is outside the EU budget and is really used for unforeseen crises. So I think that's my response.
Thanks very much, Esther, for these very clear three messages on the freedom and that we are looking regarding amendment, the new budget, and the reserve. Obviously, as you can see, EU is struggling to already get his own budget. So asking for an increase on that side is very unlikely for the coming years. So it means that many organizations, many NGOs have to look at other sources of funding. And obviously, the private funding is a key one. And this morning, Director Contini mentioned how difficult here in Italy it is about getting people responding to the appeal for some particular crisis. So I'm quite interested to ask Nada, to have your point of view from Italian NGOs, how you feel is the perception that the Italian public has about crisis, and is there a way in their response to crisis in the way that they are supporting or not Italian NGOs? Please.
Yeah, following Mr. Cantini in mentioning this today, yeah, we agree in the sense that the majority, there is a general perception among Italian public that it's not necessarily, let's say, not always positive towards Italian work or Italian NGO, and I think there are different reasons why this is happening. I would say the first aspect is that, and why is so difficult, or has been so difficult lately to carry out initiatives, fundraising initiatives in Italy targeting direct private donors. And I think there are reasons, one of which is that there has been a deterioration of the socio-economic situation in Italy. As all we know, the financial crisis had, unfortunately, a negative impact on on also the willingness of private individuals or private donor to contribute in humanitarian aid and contribute in humanitarian crisis through their own donation. And I think this impact is also related to the fact that there is a change in the perception of this. It probably is going to be more easy to, the perception of the need is more, it has been changed in the sense that it's easier to donate if the need is in close instead of kilometers away. I think there's also another element that is that I think the last years Italian NGOs have been investing not enough on communication and visibility strategies, and this you can see this because public opinion, Italian public really don't know what Italian NGO are doing in the field. So there is not a clear perception of what is our work, what are we doing, what is our value added, that we are professional organizations, that we are accessing institutional funding, also like big budgets. So we are committed, we are credible, we have regularly, we're subjected to regular, very strict audit, audit processes. So we are very committed and very reliable, but I think this is not the impression that the public has. One is also related, I think, to the fact that unfortunately the media has highlighted several bad examples of mismanagement of funding among Italian NGO, and I think this had affected negatively the idea of what we are doing. And this is not obviously has not been helpful for us because an individual experience is affecting negatively a lot of other good work of other NGOs. This is why I think that it's becoming more and more important nowadays. In this specific moment too, and it's very crucial to invest more on communication and visibility. To really try to create a link that is a trustworthy link with donors, private donors, and this is possible if we really are able to kind of marketing ourselves or to really start to show what we are able to do and what we have been doing in the field. And I think it becomes also more crucial when we think of within the partner, or let's say the public-private partnership, and how for NGOs becoming always now more crucial to be able to market ourselves also, not only to private donor, but also private sector partnerships and private sector actors.
And Lorena, as emergency coordinator, in the same vein, do you see that the public is reacting differently in its approach whenever it is a natural disaster, as we spoke a lot this morning, or when it's a crisis, or when there is a political discussion at stake?
Sure. Yes, as we were discussing this morning, there is a reflection that I would like to bring on the table today, is that, for instance, in Italy, we are, as Nada was mentioning earlier on, we, as NGO, have some difficulties sometimes in communicating, both on an individual basis and both on a network basis. I think it's very interesting, the example of Agire. For those of the very few of you that in this room don't know what Agire is the Italian Agency for Emergency Response, and 10 Italian NGOs are part of the network. So interesting enough, during their last research that takes into consideration a period of time between 2008 and 2012, what they revealed was that in 2010, because of two huge disasters, which were, of course, Haiti earthquake and the floods in Pakistan, we stressed the fact that there was the peak for fundraising in that time because of this emotional impact that both disasters had at the time. I think that this is interesting, as it was interesting, for instance, tsunami, because at that time, for Italy was the civil protection who actually was collecting funds for that, and they responded through Italian NGOs. So maybe what the public needs is to have a reference point, a focal point that could collect all the funds and then redistribute them to those professionals that are able to respond. Of course, the kind of disaster is has an impact, an emotional impact. We realize that also because as part of the Agira, we tried to launch a campaign, a regional campaign on the Middle East, and the results, unfortunately, has been very scarce. Probably we need to involve more also communication media and our communication staff from different NGOs, because we need to improve the kind of communication that we can offer to the public. This is an issue that we need to stress because it's not possible that only when the disaster occurs we are on the first line trying to explain what is going on, because these kind of disasters are, you know, part of current crisis, ongoing crisis that lasts since 10 years. The example of the Middle East and Gaza was really important, I think, this last summer in Italy. We need to communicate more, we need to communicate better, we need to be evident to the public, because the response that we need to get is on a day-by-day basis, is not only when the disaster occurs, because then it's too late.
I think that if it's reassuring in any way, it's, this situation is the same in the UK. I think that the conflict and the experience we have regarding the Middle East is that the fundraising is always much lower than when it's a natural disaster. You mentioned Agira as being an initiative as a group. You decided to appeal to the public. Is there any other fundraising mechanism or funding mechanism that the organization, the NGOs, are putting in place to try to be more attractive or more competitive in terms of getting resources? I'm thinking potential consortium. Can elaborate on that?
Sure. I would like to bring the example of Alliance 2015, which is another network. Chelsea is part of the network together with other 7 European NGOs. From Ireland, Concern, from France is Acted, from new entry is from Switzerland, which is Helvetas. Then we have PIN, another colleague from this table here, from the Czech Republic. From Germany is Weltungerhilfe. Denmark is IBIS, and Netherlands is HIVOS. Sorry, there are too many, sometimes I forget. We actually were part of the alliance since a few years, but quite recently, especially in 2010, we decided to, for a matter of opportunity mostly, because donors started to ask NGOs to act not as individual bodies, but as consortia. So since we were already an alliance and we were functional to that, I mean, we started to practice what has been often elaborated in theory, or maybe approached on a more bilateral way, more than multilateral way, according to the number of NGOs participating to the action. Alliance work together on 2 levels, which is the European level and the field level, so means overseas level. The agencies meet regularly at all levels. We have different approaches because we have different groups. We have also thematic groups. We have groups regarding the emergency, food security, fundraising, advocacy, communication, and we meet usually twice a year on European level. But we also encourage our staff in the field to meet regularly, because it's very important that in given countries the staff know themselves already, so especially they are prepared for emergency response.
And do you think that this kind of model has a chance to become a main channel of funding and to redress the balance? Because we speak a lot about NGOs as being the main deliverer. There was a lot of praise this morning in terms of NGO. We need them in the field. They are close to the people. But the percentage of the money that the NGOs are receiving is still much lower than potentially the UN agencies or other organization. And do you think that potentially this new mechanism that's put in place by organization might reverse or change the balance in terms of attracting more of this funding from governments?
Could be. I mean, in terms of funding, Pakistan experience was really positive and rewarding. I mean, on the contrary, I mean, Agire is, of course, a network that is mainly focused on fundraising on private individuals. I mean, Alliance is oriented to institutional donors, and has been recognized also by ECHO that our activities in Pakistan have been functional to the scope that we decided to assign to the action at the very beginning. Also because the added value was quite clear. We had a wider scope. We had regular exchanges and lessons learned from the different agencies. We were actually very flexible, and especially during a very unfortunate incident we had in Punjab, when one of the staff of one organization was kidnapped. Another organization was able to take over and support the activities that otherwise would have been, in a very bad.
It demonstrates that the model has this flexibility and these advantages and can be much more attractive for donors. Speaking about relationship with the institutional donors and government, and we spoke a lot about principle. Marek, what do you think actually a lot of organization, and I think it was mentioned by Dominique previously, about some choices that organizations have to make in terms of accepting or not funding from donors, and especially from governments which are involved directly or indirectly in conflict. How these choices are made? What is your experience in terms of accepting, not accepting? What are the conditions and the room for negotiation?
Well, this principled funding, or so-called principled funding, particularly in the conflicts, is a very interesting topic, and a topic which is very hard to be achieved. If we want to sanitize completely our sources of funding resources, we would have to rely 100% on the private funding, which we can really claim is absolutely free of any ideological, political attachment. But the reality is that very, very few NGOs are able to achieve this. So we are relying heavily on the governments for the funding, or on the pooled funding international mechanisms as ECHO or UN funding. And if we kind of backtrack this type of financial resources, it will always lead us to the governments who might be either part of the conflict themselves, who might be considered as sympathizers of one of the fighting parties, or who might be simply seen as siding one of the sides of the conflict. So it's almost impossible to sanitize ourselves. And I think very important thing which was mentioned in here was this kind of a suspicion, I would rather call it, on how our neutrality is perceived. I think it's more our action and our presence in the field and what we're actually doing in the field is the core on how we will be perceived, more than the funding resource. But of course it has, so I would be advocating really for finding a practical and realistic solution in every situation, while not giving up on a principle needs-based action, which is definitely the point number one. Point number two would be definitely the security of my staff, our beneficiaries, and the safety and security of other programs of my organization or other organizations in the area who might be compromised at a certain extent. And then it's an issue, a very simple issue of an access and acceptance by the fighting parties. My organization is having these weeks very particular discussions in eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk, with the separatist administration about being accepted into the Donetsk, about being able to work cross-line in the eastern Ukraine. And one of the first questions was, who is your donor? And when we said it's private donors from the Czech Republic, okay, it's ECHO, then immediately there was a reaction, is this European USAID? Is that them? We said, yeah, you can call them like this. And after half a minute of hesitation, they said, okay, fine, I think we will be okay. But next week, as we are coming with a large winterization program, which is solely funded by OFDA, we might have a very difficult discussion. But I believe that we'll be able to perceive them, that really the needs and more or less a principled action is something what hopefully will be winning. So when speaking about the principled funding in the conflict, I would really say that the principled action is the point number one, and then point number two, finding a realistic solution for the situation, because every context and every situation is somehow different.
And how do you manage, or I extend the question to all of you, in terms of following the priorities of the donors? I think that for the moment, was there any cases where, due to this massive pressure that is on NGOs to respond everywhere, and especially when it's very media-driven, do you think that many organizations have a choice to turn down the offer or the call from institutional donors and keep, in some extent, their independence? And is it really a sign of independence to really refuse a donor? And what are the conditions?
I would say the chances are always there. And again, the key should be a principled, needs-based assessment and actions. And we have been through few situations in the past few years where this approach really paid off. I would say, as the first point, it's very important to kind of harmonize the donors' priorities with the needs. And it can be really achieved through the advocacy, through the humanitarian advocacy, through a frequent exchange with the donor. And in extreme actions also with involvement of the media and the public opinion, which is a very influential tool in the advocacy. And secondly, as this is not always easy thing to achieve, an independency on the single funding resource, it means diversification of your institutional funding and expand your private fundraising, which is giving you the flexibility and the freedom of choice, are the keys. Again, being practical, us and a few other NGOs had a 9-month extended negotiation with ECHO about the cross-border assistance from Turkey to northern Syria, where there were beneficiaries in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, since end of 2012. And it took us virtually 9 months of constant communication with ECHO in Ankara, with ECHO in Brussels, inviting the people to the field, inviting the journalists, bring the stories out. And after 9 months of negotiations, we have finally managed to kind of give ECHO enough confidentiality to start financing the assistance. So the very concentrated effort paid off.
We are speaking about principle, about some kind of ethic, and there is, our system, humanitarian system, is full of buzzwords and ideas and trends. But one of them is the push for involvement of the private sector. And this morning, Vice Minister Picelli mentioned how important the public-private partnership is, and is echoing what we are hearing in many governments, and in UK I guarantee that it is a daily mantra that we are hearing. So I'm interested now that to have your perspective again from an Italian NGO perspective on how do you engage with the private sector, and what are the type of relationship or principle or frame that you are putting in place in your discussion and negotiation with them?
Yeah, I would first say that just to give an idea about the institutional level. So at the institutional level, as we all know, donors are becoming involved in. Sorry. I was saying that at the institutional level, donors are increasingly recognizing the importance of partnership with the private sector. So, for just an example, is the new AU communication on private sector in 2014, which stresses and emphasizes the importance of the private sector in boosting the humanitarian and development actions. At the national Italian level as well, we have an important example that is not only for this, but also has an emphasis on this subject, that is the new law. The new law in 2014 that was issued in 2014 in August has an article that highlights this point of the importance of creating a more inclusive, diverse environment where all actors involved and interested in development, in humanitarian. I was like, so all actors involved in development and humanitarian cooperation should come together. And just in regards to the law, I hope that all NGOs are hoping that when there's going to be the, let's say, the application of the law, there's going to be a very clear also clear roles of what are the responsibilities of all the different actors, just to avoid really, like, at the practical level confusions, and I hope, we really hope and welcome this whenever the guidelines are going to be applicated. From in regards to the private sector perspective, as we all know, there's corporate social responsibility that has now become almost a must also among Italian companies that seek for a greater internalization. So in this frame, probably NGOs can have a role also to provide information about real needs, to help to identify need for sustainable development in different communities. At the for the NGO perspective, partnering with private sector, it's for sure it's an attractive opportunity for different reasons. One is obviously greater availability of funding in this very dire difficult period that could help to fill the gaps that institutional donors right now have created, especially in relation to initiatives that are still extremely important and are priorities. But, like, for example, for us is the transitional initiatives, as well as resilience initiatives. I mean, all these activities that are the link between emergency and development could somehow be presented to also alternative donors, so in this case private donors. Another element could be of a value added is the technical expertise and the technical knowledge that could be shared among various actors in order to increase and improve the quality in the field of programs. Why not, especially in certain sectors. The private sector for us has also helped us as an NGO to launch campaigns on certain humanitarian issues that can also have the role to improve the awareness of public opinion and public in general, especially in Italy, where that otherwise could not necessarily.
Thanks, Nat. I'm conscious about the time, so I want to leave the possibility of the floor to for any question that you may have, and trying to be back on track with the timing. So please, we went for a wide range of coping mechanisms that NGOs are going through in trying to diversify and increase their resources to address some of the institutional shortage. And so I'm interested to hear from you any question that you may have or experience that you may have in these areas, and especially what you think is the future of the organization, and what are the main barriers or the main trap that we have to avoid. Please.
I'm going to spoil the party. And it's not only because it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and spoiling the party is probably the only way of keeping people's attention. But this whole business of the private sector and sort of fulfilling the shortfalls of public finance by the private sector, and you are all allowed to quote me, it is a pie in the sky. Repeat, it is a pie in the sky. It is possible that private resources can replace 5 or 10% of the amounts. We are nowhere near the scale of needs. We are talking of hundreds of millions. You are never going to, we are talking about of billions. You are never going to get this type of money from the public. You are never, the other part of my professional life is working for a private donor, so I somewhat know what I am talking about. The rest of the private sector is never, you are never going to get this type of money. How do you say, social responsibility of companies, corporate social responsibility. We must understand corporations. I mean, they are going to want to have some form of a return on this corporate social responsibility. If you are based in Milano, okay, you will maybe apply corporate social responsibility to a quota in Milano, not in the Central African Republic. There is just no return on this. So I'm saying this for a simple reason. It is such a pie in the sky. I think that we must have, at least, I mean, I'm in a privileged position to say so. I think it would be irresponsible for us to give the impression to the political world, to decision makers, to different ministries, that this is an avenue. Apart from that, I understand, we all understand the financial constraints under which states are. It's an objective fact. So there are difficulties, but to imagine that this is a solution, I think we must absolutely avoid at all costs this pie in the sky from floating. Thank you.
Yeah, Esther, any comment on the pie in the sky?
Well, no, I agree, and maybe it's also about playing the devil's advocate towards our governments, and it's about political choices. What do we want? What do we expect? Do we want to buy more planes for the Ministry of Defense? Or do we want to increase the humanitarian and development budgets? And these are real political choices. A second possible avenue that I think we are not exploring enough, and we were confronted to that in the discussions about the eco-budget, particularly from some of these anti-European, parties saying why we should be still helping people outside Europe. We have thousands of people unemployed in Europe at risk of poverty and social exclusion, and it's not confronting poor against the poor. I think sometimes we need to look for the money where the money is. And European enterprises are avoiding taxes. They are not paying taxes in our countries. This is money that is not going to public budgets in Europe. And I think we should be looking at that as well, because the amounts are huge compared to our tiny humanitarian budget. So I think we should challenge much more some of the, systemic issues. I know maybe it goes beyond the expertise of humanitarian NGOs, but this is where the alliance building can play into digging more into how much this money is fleeing Europe. Because I'm sure that we could fill a lot of public budgets with that.
You may have a place in the ministry for trying to fill the gap. Does it trigger any other reaction in addition to Catherine? From Catherine, please.
Not in relation to that, but I was wondering in relation to the UN. Most governments are sitting on boards of UN agencies. They are putting more and more money to the UN. On NGOs, the administrative burden increases, and the demand for accountability and taxpayers' money and value for money is increasing a lot. What do you think about that? Should not governments give money rather to NGOs than more and more to the UN?
Who wants to take that one?
Can I?
Yeah, please. Go.
Sure, that would be absolutely great. Most of the time with the UN, there is this escamotage, so that money goes from the government to the UN, and then the UN cannot implement activities, so the money is channeled through NGOs. For activities, but that's a passage that is not value for money oriented at all. So, of course, it would be great, and I would propose that, for instance, some budget would be diverted from the UN to the NGOs, but I think that this is a political issue that needs to be dealt with both European institutions and individual governments. And we need maybe to be on the same side to prepare some advocacy struggle in order to be ready for a battle, because I don't think it would be that easy. I mean, it's such a political issue that it won't be so automatic to get the funds. But I perfectly agree with you.
Marek, and Catherine, I'll give you back.
I completely agree, but just to be frank to ourselves, we should acknowledge that the same argumentation we can hear from the national NGOs, from the countries, that the money are being unnecessarily cascaded through an international NGOs who are also kind of guaranteeing and reporting on the money and assuring the transparency, and etc., etc., etc. But exactly the same wording could be heard against us. So let's just join these arguments into one.
I would like to come back on that after that. Nada, do you want to
just
say
to
something?
add on what both of our colleagues are saying, in regards to the Italian NGO, and as you mentioned, there has been a very positive interaction on this end discussion on humanitarian issue between the Italian government and Italian NGO. But however, this not necessarily translate, as you said, into funding for NGOs. Just to give you an example, for the Syrian crisis, around 15 million were given to UN agencies, and the half of it was for for Italian NGO. It was just to add that it's still a situation that is also Italian NGO are facing, not having, getting less amount of money than UN does.
Catherine, you wanted to
No, I
add?
just wanted to tell that actually the Dutch NGOs have just managed, after many years, that the government is now channeling more money to them than to the UN. And the Dutch government has been one of the ones putting most money to the UN. So it is possible.
It was not that case for the Italian ministry.
Just an add-on to Catherine. The way they managed, this is important. The Dutch managed because they got from the government that the scrutiny of UN payments was to be the same as for NGOs. And this is what, through scrutiny, this is how they managed to win this battle.
Thank you. And a really interesting discussion. I think, we've heard a number of the dysfunctionalities within the system. So I'd be really keen to ask the panelists, if you were starting again with a blank slate, what would you do? How would you design the system? And the reason I ask is that I think that these discussions are hugely pertinent now over the next couple of years leading up to the World Humanitarian Summit, because clearly something has to change in the system. And is it just going to be tinkering on the sides? And I really question whether tinkering is going to actually address that huge gap that we've heard about between increasing needs and less resources. And I think, Marek mentioned a really important point about how we support and enable Southern actors actually to be the primary responders and not, over and over again, for international actors to come in. And I just want to mention a shameless plug, if I may, Chair, that CAFOD, together with a couple of other NGOs that are working through the IASC, which is a UN and NGO body, through the IASC task team on humanitarian financing, on a piece of work trying to envisage and research and think about what the future of humanitarian financing should look like. So, you know, we've got open consultations. It's www.futurehumanitarianfinancing. So, if I may throw the question to the panel.
Thanks. Before we respond, Marco.
Just two remarks, actually. The first is on local, national actors, whatever you want to call them. Sure, I have the full respect. I've promoted, I think, our thinking on that earlier this morning. Let's not overestimate the capacity of independence and the capacity that they may have to act compliantly with the principles in given circumstances. It's not easy for us. It's more difficult for them because most of the times they are totally involved with their families, their interests, and everything there where the things are happening. So there should be, let's say, we cannot take it as, okay, let's go local and everything will be fine and the people will live in peace first. On the overall humanitarian budget, I think we're around 22 billion right now per year. It's just, it has been said, is 1% of the total public aid, but is a figure that shocked me a lot. Is a commenter of the MSF Crash Foundation and blah, 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 say they did some calculation, is 1/3 of the yogurt industry in the world. So we're talking about something that can be, you know, probably dealt with political choices and so on. So I fully agree with Esther's point on making choices. Just these two remarks.
Thanks for the comparison. Somebody wants to reply in the panel? Yeah, Esther?
Again, from a very EU narrow perspective, because this is my area of expertise, I think the issues that we are facing with the current budget has to do with, as I said, with the structural issues that are going to be put on the agenda very soon. And it has to do with the way the EU budget has been operating. This is commitment versus the payments, which is, I mean, causing big trouble. So I guess that would be for discussion very, very soon. And again, I think we would need to make up our minds as well, not just as humanitarian, with other sectors of civil society, to look at these budget structural issues. That could be one of the responses, again, looking at the narrow perspective of the EU budget.
Nobody? So I think that's the...
It was really super.
And you... That's a nice question to have, to give us a white sheet. Lovely. I think, Nicola, the idea of the accountability, and that every actor should be accountable when they receive the same level of accountability, the same process and procedures, wherever you are, an NGO, a local, an international, the Red Cross or the UN agency or private company, when receiving funds from a donor. It's probably something that could be promoted during the next World Humanitarian Summit, which I think, and I will terminate on that, is probably going to be, yes, a big monster which is coming, and we don't know too much what is going to come out of that. But I think we should also be quite vigilant and try to be proactive in passing ideas and key principles that we want to get in that summit before it's endorsed. Some ideas of funding mechanism or ways of operation that we cannot control. So I strongly encourage all of you here to put some thinking, to organize, to use the alliance that are already in place, to engage with your government in terms of trying to shape, if possible, what is going to be discussed at the summit, and especially this question of funding and the mechanism that are in place and the principle around this funding. That will be a good opportunity, and it's in 2 years. 2 years' time, so still time, but decisions are going to be taken within the next 18 months, more or less. Sorry? In 1 year. I say 18 months, I was even too generous, within the next 12 months. So time for us to conclude and to invite Mario Baldi, who is the director of the emergency department from the International Cooperation. Sorry if the title is not so perfect. And it's my pleasure to welcome you for the closing session.
I didn't want to... Non volevo... Prego, volevo sfrattarvi, No, però so di essere l'ultimo ostacolo tra voi il fine settimana, e per gli ospiti che sono venuti dall'estero addirittura un fine settimana è una grande bellezza di Roma, quindi sarò più che umanitario umano. Quindi volevo semplicemente ringraziarvi di essere venuti, come ha detto il Vice Ministro Pistelli, il Direttore Cantini all'inizio. Abbiamo volentieri accolto l'invito di Intersos e di Voice di ospitare questo evento. È molto difficile sintetizzare quello che si è detto in questa giornata, perché sono state tantissime considerazioni molto utili. Quello che io ho preso, perché mi è piaciuto molto come riferimento, è il fatto che la cooperazione umanitaria, sembrerà una banalità, però deve avere sempre l'essere umano al centro, e non è scontato. Io anche all'interno di questo Ministero certe volte mi sento come in una riserva indiana, perché non siamo tanti a pensarla così. Quindi questo evento che ha aperto le porte della Farnesina alle ONG, al mondo del volontariato, è come una ventata di aria fresca che ci aiuta a lavorare bene per il futuro con più entusiasmo. Poi dicevamo la generosità non basta, ci vuole la professionalità, quella cerchiamo di mettercela, ci vogliono i soldi, anche quelli servono, però sia gli uni che gli altri, professionalità e risorse, non bastano se non c'è questa partecipazione, questo immedesimarsi nelle condizioni di chi poi noi dovremmo aiutare. Io quindi vedo nel rapporto tra governo e ONG su questo versante veramente un'occasione di arricchimento, perché come dicevo prima voi rappresentate, le ONG rappresentano quelle istanze più avvertite della società civile italiana. Lo dico a beneficio degli ospiti stranieri, una delle cose più straordinarie del nostro Paese è proprio la ricchezza e la voglia di aiutare che c'è, perché noi vediamo soltanto una parte, ma gli italiani non si occupano soltanto di aiutare coloro che vogliono aiutare delle persone che stanno male all'estero. Ci sono centinaia, migliaia di rivoli di solidarietà all'interno del nostro Paese, dove abbiamo sacche di sofferenza, accoglienze immigrati, ma anche penso alle adozioni a distanza o all'aiuto alle missioni cattoliche, che sfuggono dai meccanismi di finanziamento dei governi e di alcune o di tutte le ONG, che però sono parte integrante di un tessuto sociale che è fatto di solidarietà e che noi siamo orgogliosi di avere. Penso che la congiuntura attuale della politica italiana non potrebbe essere delle più favorevoli. Abbiamo un Presidente del Consiglio che viene dal mondo del volontariato, abbiamo un Presidente della Camera che viene dall'ambiente umanitario internazionale, abbiamo un Ministro, un Vice Ministro degli Esteri che sia per generazione, sia anche proprio per passato culturale vengono da quell'esperienza di aiuto. Quindi ci sono tutti i presupposti, compatibilmente con le risorse che non sono molto ricche, per fare bene. La nuova legge, spero, di cui si è parlato, ci aiuterà a avere degli strumenti un po' più snelli. Ho sentito dire e condivido che purtroppo la legge attuale, che ha dei pregi ma anche dei difetti, ha il difetto principale che non consente di lavorare rapidamente con le ONG sull'emergenza. Noi riusciamo a lavorare rapidamente con la gestione diretta, riusciamo a lavorare rapidamente con le organizzazioni internazionali, ma non abbastanza rapidamente con le ONG. Speriamo che la nuova agenzia riesca a colmare questa lacuna. L'ultima cosa, mi è molto piaciuto questo concetto del donatore vero, che è l'opinione pubblica. Non siamo noi governi, non siete voi ONG, non sono le organizzazioni internazionali, i donatori sono le nostre opinioni pubbliche. Su questo governi e ONG, e aggiungo i media, devono essere alleati, perché se noi abbiamo delle opinioni pubbliche avvertite, sensibili, che vengono rassicurate sul buon utilizzo. Ecco, quello che c'è di straordinario nella solidarietà della società civile italiana è che lo è nonostante le banalità che ascolta, nonostante le ruberie che ha dovuto subire delle proprie donazioni, nonostante degli esempi che negli anni non sono stati molto esaltanti. Ecco, se noi riusciamo a rassicurare la nostra opinione pubblica, anche a informarla, ne avremo tutti da guadagnare, non soltanto proprio dal punto di vista dell'attività all'esterno del Paese, ma proprio come ricchezza della nostra società. Grazie, di nuovo benvenuti a voi a Roma, e mi auguro, ripeto, che a questo evento che abbiamo organizzato volentieri con Intersource e con voi se ne seguano altri, sempre qui alla Farnesina. Con Link 2007, scusate, non rischiamo il caso diplomatico, con Link 2007.
Don't worry, I'm not going to make concluding remarks. I'm only going to make a few thank yous and say how much I appreciated the quality of the information of our Italian partners and members of Voice, and I think this was just a great day for us. I hope that our presence will also be useful for you. I'm going away with a lot, and I hope that we have brought half as much. And again, I think that in your concluding remarks, the only thing that I hope from this event is enhanced relations between Italian NGOs and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They exist, enhanced. Just, you know, I think we all need, we really need to talk together, and I think that so many of the interventions this afternoon proved how useful this is. So thank you very much for having invited us. Thank you very much again to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for having hosted us. This is also very symbolic that this is taking place, you know, under your roof. And thank you for the sun. Thank you for the coming weekend. And may everybody have a very good return home or a very nice stay in Rome. Thank you.
Are you staying in Rome, or you go back? How can I resist? Okay, how can I resist? Where are you from? France or? I'm Swiss. I'm from Geneva. I'm Bercy. Exactement. Voilà.